Have you ever wondered why some smiles, though seemingly bright, carry a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor? A ghost of a feeling that whispers of something lost, something deeply altered? We've all encountered it. The friend, the colleague, the loved one whose laughter still rings, whose eyes still crinkle at the corners. But within that familiar visage, an unspoken narrative unfolds. It's the kind of smile that says, "I am here, I am present," while simultaneously hinting, "But I am not the same as I once was." This isn't about the fleeting sadness that passes with the clouds. It's about a fundamental shift, a recalibration of the inner world that changes the very essence of how joy is expressed. It's about the woman who still smiles, but it's not the same anymore. Elara had always been the sun in her circle. Her laughter a melodic chime that could banish shadows from any room. Her spirit was an unyielding flame, a beacon of effervescent optimism that drew others into its warmth. She was the one who organized impromptu picnics in the rain, who found beauty in forgotten alleyways, who believed in the inherent goodness of every soul she met. Her smiles were not merely a turning up of the lips. They were full-body expressions, radiating from her eyes, crinkling the corners, and even making her shoulders shake with mirth. To know Elara was to bask in her unwavering light. Yet, as the seasons turned and years drifted like fallen leaves, a subtle change began to take hold. It started almost imperceptibly, a fleeting hesitation before a laugh, a slight tightening around her eyes even as her lips curved upward. Her friends, attuned to her vibrant spirit, noticed it first, a diminished resonance in her joy, like a once-perfect bell developing a hairline fracture. The shift, though outwardly subtle, was born from a profound inner turmoil, a crucible of experiences that tested the very foundations of her psyche. Elara, in her boundless empathy, had always been drawn to those who needed her light the most. She had a tendency to become a vessel for the emotional burdens of others, an unconscious habit of absorbing their pain as if it were her own. This was, in essence, a manifestation of her powerful anima, her innate capacity for nurturing and connection, but without the necessary boundaries to protect her own energetic well-being. She had, in the language of Jungian psychology, neglected her shadow, the part of her that needed to say no, to protect her own space, to acknowledge her limits. Instead, she had projected her own unspoken needs for validation and belonging onto the act of perpetually giving, believing that her worth was intrinsically tied to her ability to soothe the distress of others. This pattern culminated in a relationship with a man, Julian, who, unknowingly or not, leveraged this very aspect of her nature. Julian was charismatic, intelligent, and deeply troubled, a whirlwind of emotional highs and lows. He presented himself as a wounded soul, a man in need of understanding and healing, and Elara, with her vast well of compassion, stepped into that role without hesitation. She became his confidant, his emotional anchor, his constant source of reassurance. She spent countless nights listening to his anxieties, analyzing his past traumas, and offering unwavering support, often at the expense of her own sleep, her own hobbies, her own peace. One particularly poignant evening, after a grueling week of supporting Julian through a professional crisis, Elara found herself staring at her reflection. Her face was drawn, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Julian had called her earlier, effusively thanking her for her help, praising her strength, telling her she was the only one who truly understood him. For a fleeting moment, a familiar warmth bloomed in her chest, the affirmation she craved. But then, a cold, sharp shard of realization pierced through it. She remembered a small, casual slight from Julian earlier that day, a dismissive comment about a personal ambition she had shared, brushed aside with a wave of his hand. It wasn't malicious, not overtly, but it was emblematic of a pattern. Her needs, her aspirations, always took a back seat to his tumultuous inner world. She saw, with chilling clarity, how her own sense of self was slowly eroding, replaced by the reflection of his dependence. Her inner dialogue, usually a chorus of hopeful thoughts, had become a quiet, almost imperceptible hum of "Am I enough?" and "What more can I do?" This was the insidious nature of the erosion. It didn't arrive with a bang, but with a whisper, a gradual dimming of her own light as she poured herself into another. The genuine, unrestrained joy that had once flowed so freely was now filtered through a lens of quiet resignation. Her smiles, though still present, carried the weight of unacknowledged sacrifices, a silent pact she had made with herself to maintain the peace, to keep the fragile structure of their relationship intact, even if it meant sacrificing a part of herself. The turning point, or perhaps the breaking point, arrived during a quiet birthday dinner. Elara had spent weeks planning a thoughtful gift for Julian, a limited edition book by his favorite obscure poet. She presented it with genuine excitement, her old enthusiasm momentarily resurfacing. Julian, preoccupied with a phone call, merely glanced at it, offered a perfunctory "thanks, babe," and returned to his conversation. He didn't see the flicker of disappointment in her eyes, didn't notice the way her shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. He didn't see the careful, almost practiced smile she offered to the waiter moments later, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Later that night, as she lay awake, the weight of that unacknowledged gesture pressed down on her. It wasn't the gift itself, but the symbolic dismissal of her effort, her thoughtfulness, her very presence. It was a stark illustration of how, despite her relentless giving, she was receiving very little in return that truly nourished her soul. This wasn't just a disappointment. It was a profound realization of the imbalance, a recognition that her boundless empathy was being exploited, not reciprocated. The smile, once a reflection of her inner exuberance, had become a mask, a social convention, a way to signal compliance and avoid confrontation. The raw, unfiltered joy had receded, replaced by a quiet, persistent ache. The character of Elara embodies the caregiver archetype, driven by an inherent need to nurture and support others. However, without a strong sense of individuation, the process of developing a coherent and unique self, this archetype can become self-sacrificial. Her pain stems from an unchecked anima projection, where her feminine principle of relatedness and connection was overextended and exploited. This led to a profound shadow work opportunity, as she was forced to confront the unacknowledged parts of herself that yearned for validation, for boundaries, and for self-preservation. Her journey reflects a classic pattern seen in developmental psychology, particularly through the lens of Erik Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. Elara was seemingly stuck in a stage where her need for intimacy, forming close relationships, overshadowed her need for identity, leading to a diffusion of her self-worth. Her experience also highlights Carl Jung's concept of unconditional positive regard, or rather, the lack thereof in her relationship, which chipped away at her self-concept. So, what does this mean for you, watching this? Have you ever found yourself in Elara's shoes, giving until your well runs dry? Your smiles becoming less about genuine joy and more about maintaining an illusion? The first step toward reclaiming your authentic smile, your authentic self, is radical self-awareness. Look within. Where are you overgiving? Who are you giving to that isn't giving back in ways that truly nourish you? Set boundaries, not as walls, but as acts of self-love. Your energy is finite, a precious resource. Learn to discern where to invest it wisely. Embrace your no as much as your yes. This isn't selfish. It's self-preservation. It's about understanding that your worth is intrinsic, not derived from how much you can do for others. Begin to nurture your own inner child, the part of you that perhaps learned that giving was the only way to be loved. Reconnect with what truly lights you up, independent of anyone else's needs. Your authentic smile, the one that radiates from your very core, awaits your rediscovery. It's a journey back to yourself, a journey of courageous self-reclamation. The most poignant smiles are often those that hide the deepest pain, those that have become a practiced artifice rather than a spontaneous overflow of joy. It's a paradox of the human condition. We learn to present a facade of contentment even when our inner landscape is ravaged by storms. This subtle shift from genuine expression to a carefully curated performance is often a defense mechanism, a means of navigating a world that, at times, can feel too overwhelming to face with raw vulnerability. This is the second layer of the smile that isn't the same anymore. The subtle adoption of a shield, a protective veneer. Consider the profound wisdom offered by Carl Jung when he spoke of the persona. Jung posited that the persona is the mask we wear in public, the impression we wish to create on the world. It is, in essence, our public personality, often a compromise between what we truly are and what society expects of us. For Elara, and indeed for many, her radiant, unyielding smile became an increasingly rigid persona. It was no longer an authentic expression of her inner state but a carefully constructed barrier, a social contract designed to maintain harmony, to avoid probing questions, and to prevent others from witnessing the quiet erosion within. This is where the concept of ego projection becomes critically important. When Elara constantly offered her boundless empathy and support to Julian, she was, in a sense, projecting her own unmet needs onto him. Her deep desire for connection, for validation, for being seen and cherished, was externalized onto the act of giving. She believed that by being indispensable to Julian, she would, in turn, receive the love and affirmation she craved. However, this dynamic often leads to a distorted reality where one's self-worth becomes entirely dependent on external validation, a precarious foundation indeed. The smile, then, transforms into a tool for eliciting that validation, a desperate plea for connection disguised as contentment. It becomes a subtle performance, a nuanced act of self-effacement designed to elicit a reciprocal action, a return on the emotional investment. B.F. Skinner's work on operant conditioning provides another lens through which to understand this shift. If Elara received positive reinforcement, Julian's praise, his momentary relief, his declarations of dependency, every time she put his needs before her own, then this behavior, the self-sacrificial giving, the forced smile, became reinforced. The genuine internal discomfort was overshadowed by the immediate, albeit fleeting, external reward. Over time, the intrinsic motivation for joy, for authentic self-expression, was gradually extinguished, replaced by a learned behavior driven by external contingencies. The smile, once spontaneous, became a conditioned response, a predictable outcome of her desire to maintain peace and elicit approval. This brings us to the insidious nature of trauma psychology and its impact on modern self-worth. Often, an individual's early experiences or sustained emotional environments teach them that their value is contingent on their utility to others, or on their ability to suppress their own discomfort for the sake of harmony. For Elara, her inherent giving nature, coupled with Julian's consistent absorption of her emotional labor, created a subtle, ongoing trauma. It wasn't the kind of trauma that leaves visible scars, but a slow, persistent wounding of her sense of self. Each unreciprocated effort, each dismissed need, chipped away at her fundamental belief in her own inherent worth. The smile, then, became a coping mechanism, a way to signal, "I'm okay, nothing is wrong," when in reality, a profound internal struggle was underway. It was a stoic acceptance of her fate, not in the empowering sense of stoicism that encourages control over one's reactions, but in a defeated resignation to circumstances she felt powerless to change. The deceptive nature of this altered smile lies in its very subtlety. It's not a frown, not a tear-stained face. It's a smile, yet it lacks the effervescence, the genuine sparkle that once defined it. It's the difference between a roaring bonfire and embers struggling to stay alight. This shift is often accompanied by an internal monologue that questions one's own perceptions. Am I being too sensitive? Is this really happening? Or am I imagining it? This self-doubt is a hallmark of emotional manipulation and gaslighting, where one's reality is constantly undermined. The smile then becomes a way to outwardly conform, to avoid rocking the boat, to prevent further questioning of one's own sanity. It's a surrender to the narrative imposed by the external world, even when that narrative clashes violently with internal truth. The gradual disappearance of authentic joy is often a silent alarm bell, a signal that the inner landscape has become barren. The spontaneity of emotion, the childlike wonder, the uninhibited expression of delight, these are the casualties when the self is consistently neglected and its boundaries are repeatedly breached. The smile becomes a placeholder, a generic emoji for a complex and often painful reality. It is the social lubricant that prevents deeper inquiries, a superficial sign of well-being that deflects true connection. The internal cost, however, is immense. A growing sense of isolation, a profound feeling of being unseen and unheard, even amidst company. The character of Elara, in this phase, is deeply entrenched in the archetype of the martyr, finding a warped sense of purpose in self-sacrifice. Her struggle highlights a critical aspect of psychological health, the need for reciprocity in relationships. Without it, the emotional well depletes, and the soul starves. The altered smile is a symptom of a deeper wound, a testament to the fact that her anima, her soul and inner feminine, is being suffocated by the demands of others and her own misguided pursuit of external validation. Therefore, for you, the viewer, it is crucial to understand that healing pain begins with recognizing its subtle manifestations. Do your smiles feel genuine? Or are they a reflex, a social obligation? Are you constantly giving, only to feel empty afterwards? This pattern is not sustainable. Albert Bandura's concept of self-efficacy reminds us that believing in our ability to influence events is paramount. You possess the power to change this dynamic. Begin by validating your own feelings, even if no one else does. Your internal discomfort is a legitimate signal. Practice radical self-compassion. You are not responsible for anyone else's happiness or emotional stability. Your primary responsibility is to yourself, to nurture your own well-being. Start small. Say no to one request that drains you. Spend time alone, reconnecting with your own desires and needs. Your authentic self, vibrant and whole, is waiting to re-emerge, and with it, a smile that genuinely reaches your eyes. This isn't about being selfish. It's about acknowledging your inherent worth and demanding the reciprocity you deserve. Even as the practiced smile becomes a familiar mask, there arrives a moment of profound introspection, a quiet reckoning with the self that has been slowly obscured. This is the third, and perhaps most crucial, aspect of the smile that isn't the same anymore. The dawning realization that the cost of maintaining the facade has become too great, prompting a deep yearning for liberation and authentic self-expression. It is the subtle rebellion of the soul, a quiet stirring that demands genuine rebirth. The journey towards reclaiming one's authentic self often begins with a critical confrontation of our own ingrained patterns, particularly those shaped by early experiences. As Sigmund Freud articulated, much of our adult behavior is rooted in unconscious drives and childhood development. For Elara, her childhood, while filled with love, had subtly reinforced the idea that her value lay in her ability to be the good girl, the peacemaker, the one who kept everyone happy. This early conditioning created a fertile ground for the self-sacrificial tendencies that later flourished in her relationship with Julian. Her deep-seated need for approval and fear of conflict, remnants of an earlier psychological landscape, made it incredibly difficult to challenge the status quo, even when it was detrimental to her well-being. The seemingly innocuous smiles were, in this light, a manifestation of her ego's defense mechanisms, attempting to preserve a fragile sense of self-worth by avoiding confrontation and maintaining external harmony. This internal struggle is further illuminated by Jean Piaget's work on cognitive development, specifically the concept of assimilation and accommodation. For too long, Elara had been assimilating the narrative Julian presented, bending her own perceptions to fit his reality. She accommodated his needs, his emotional fluctuations, his narrative of victimhood, without challenging it. The shift began when her internal experiences could no longer be assimilated into this existing framework. The persistent ache, the feeling of emptiness despite constant giving, created a cognitive dissonance that forced a re-evaluation. Her mind, in essence, began to accommodate a new, uncomfortable truth. Her current reality was unsustainable, and her emotional well-being was in severe jeopardy. This cognitive awakening paved the way for emotional liberation. The profound impact of this realization often brings one face to face with their shadow, the repressed parts of the self that are often deemed unacceptable or undesirable. For Elara, her shadow contained her anger, her resentment, her unmet needs, and her capacity for assertive boundaries. These aspects had been suppressed, deemed un-Elara-like, but they were precisely the elements she needed to integrate to achieve individuation, the process of becoming a whole, integrated self. The journey involved a painful, yet ultimately liberating, confrontation with these disowned parts, understanding that true wholeness embraces both light and shadow. Elara's awakening wasn't a sudden explosion but a slow, gathering storm within. It began with small acts of self-reclamation. She started meditating again, something she had abandoned in her ceaseless efforts to support Julian. In the stillness, she began to hear her own voice, faint at first, then growing stronger. She reconnected with an old friend who, sensing Elara's subtle shift, gently posed a reflective question. Are you truly happy, or just busy being busy for others? This seemingly simple question pierced through the carefully constructed persona, hitting the raw nerve of truth. The confrontation with Julian was inevitable, born not of malice, but of a newfound, quiet strength. It wasn't a shouting match, but a calm, resolute declaration of her needs. "Julian," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "I care about you, but I can no longer continue to give without receiving. My own well-being is suffering." Julian, accustomed to her unwavering support, initially reacted with confusion, then a subtle attempt at manipulation, trying to invoke her empathy. But Elara, armed with her nascent self-awareness, recognized the pattern and held firm. This was a testament to the principles of William James, who emphasized the importance of conscious will and effort in shaping one's experience. She was actively choosing to shape her reality rather than passively endure it. This brave act of self-assertion, while initially painful, was the catalyst for profound transformation. It was a clear demonstration of Albert Bandura's social learning theory in action. Elara was not just learning about boundaries. She was practicing them, observing the consequences, and internalizing the power of her own agency. The aftermath of the confrontation was messy, as true liberation often is. Julian eventually faded from her life, unable to adapt to a relationship where he was no longer the sole recipient of all emotional energy. The silence he left behind, initially daunting, slowly began to fill with the quiet hum of her own presence. Elara started painting again, a passion she had abandoned years ago. Her canvases, once bright and airy, now explored darker, more complex emotions, a testament to her integrated shadow. She joined a women's empowerment group, finding resonance in shared stories and discovering the power of collective strength, a manifestation of the core tenets of empowering feminism. Her smiles, at first tentative, began to bloom with a new kind of radiance. They were quieter, perhaps less outwardly effusive than before, but infinitely more genuine. They held the wisdom of experience, the scars of lessons learned, and the quiet triumph of self-reclamation. They were no longer a mask but a reflection of a soul that had faced its depths and emerged stronger, more authentic, and undeniably, truly herself. This journey of liberation, as seen in Elara's narrative, is a powerful reminder that the anima/animus integration is not merely theoretical. It's a lived experience. For Elara, it was about integrating her assertive, boundary-setting animus energy with her nurturing anima, finding a balance that allowed her to give without depleting herself. This echoes Carl Rogers' emphasis on congruence, the alignment between one's ideal self, true self, and self-image. When Elara began living in alignment with her authentic needs, her self-concept healed, and her smiles became a true reflection of her inner peace. What does this mean for you, watching this? It means that if your smile feels like a burden, if it's a shield rather than a window to your soul, you hold the power to change that narrative. Your pain, however subtle, is a compass pointing you towards deeper healing. Embrace the courage to confront your own shadow, to acknowledge the parts of you that have been repressed. Begin by setting small, firm boundaries in your relationships, whether personal or professional. Your no is as sacred as your yes. Invest in practices that nurture your inner world: meditation, journaling, creative expression, spending time in nature. These are not luxuries. They are necessities for self-individuation. Remember the wisdom of Stoicism. You cannot control external events, but you absolutely control your reactions and your internal state. Cultivate an inner locus of control, understanding that your worth is inherent and does not depend on external validation. The journey back to your true self, while challenging, is the most empowering voyage you will ever undertake. It's a rebirth, a reclamation of your inherent power, a profound act of self-love that allows your authentic light to shine. The genuine smile, full of the quiet strength of self-possession, awaits. If you find it interesting or see yourself in the story, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment to help our channel feel from you. And if you know someone who needs this video, please send them this video as a necessary share. Thanks for watching. The end.